So we are live now. Thank you to all four of our faculty members for joining us today for the sort of faculty panel for our admitted incoming students. As many of you students know, my name is James. I'm one of the senior admissions counselors here at Quest. You've probably met me on the road or at other events and through that. And if not, feel free to get in touch. Always happy to chat. Today, our panel will be about 40-45 minutes or so, and you'll hear from a range of faculty members who I will not introduce. I will actually let them introduce themselves now, and actually perhaps we will start with Richard, and I'll say the name of the person to talk, otherwise it might be a big mess of everyone at one time. So Richard, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Great. Hello to all of you. My name is Richard Hashino. I teach math and computer science at Quest, and my research area is in scheduling optimization and other areas of applied mathematics.
Great. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I am Megan McNutt. I've been teaching and learning at Quest since 2012. I generally teach biology, but mostly human biology, exercise science, and health science.
Emma?
Hi, my name is Emma Davey, and at Quest I teach the fleet of chemistry courses. So if you take chemistry, you will meet and spend time with me.
And Doug.
Hi everybody, my name is Doug Monroe. I have also been at Quest since about 2012. My background is in politics and military strategy. My research in my doctorate days was on counterterrorism. These days it's more about how to win elections. And at Quest I teach a bunch of different courses about politics and also occasionally about rhetoric.
Fantastic. And so all of the next few questions that we have are all pretty much the most commonly asked questions that we get from students when we're at panels, when we host our panels in person. And so to start it off right away, the first question is just, how is the classroom sort of experience dynamic at Quest different from other institutions you may have worked at? And we'll start with Megan to answer that question.
Okay, so I was a student in, I guess, about 3 different more traditional universities, and I've taught at 2 or 3 other traditional universities as well. The types of classes that I now teach, but in a very different format. And my experience as a teacher and a learner in those other places was pretty traditional lecture format for most of my science courses that I took. A lot of time watching PowerPoint slides and, occasionally asking questions to the professor, but a lot of kind of sitting and listening. And to be fair, that worked for me. I learned a lot. But the way that I teach now is really different than that, and my students' experience is very different. I knew that it was a good idea to do active teaching and learning. I sort of had read the theory that it was really great, but I couldn't quite imagine how you would teach anatomy and physiology without actually lecturing to people until I came to Quest and started experimenting, basically. And over the 7 or 8 years that I've been here, I keep track. I know that I lecture about 5 to 10% of my class times, and the rest of the time my students are usually doing something active. They're working in small groups. I set up my classrooms so that they're actually in small groups all the time inside the classroom. A lot of my colleagues do the same thing, kind of permanently in breakout, and they put things in order. They make concept maps out of little pieces of paper that I have. I pass around models of things. They create replicas of their own digestive systems using yarn and all kinds of pretty hands-on stuff. Lots of discussion, very interactive. I tend to speak less than other people do in the classroom, I would say. And then I try to just keep the lecturing to where it's essential to really like, whoa, everybody's confused here. We better talk about this for a couple of minutes, or a little intro to set things up. But I've really moved away from that, and it's great because I hate hearing myself talk, basically. So it works out for everybody.
And Emma, you had also wanted to answer this question.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple other things too. Like, so yeah, our classrooms tend to be much more dynamic. And as a student who sat in a 300-person organic chemistry lecture and learned virtually nothing that way, it was really so wonderful to get to teach organic chemistry to 15 people in a small room where we all knew each other's names. I also find that this reduces the barrier to students coming to talk to me. So students will come use my office hours and I get to learn things about them as students and as people, which I love. And I get to talk to them about their futures, which I love. And then for students who are learning in field or lab or other experiential ways, being in these small classes means you learn directly from your faculty members. At bigger institutions, the person who plans your lab and the person who plans your lecture are different people. And sometimes that means that they're asynchronous and they don't really talk to each other. And here I plan all my lectures and labs together. Everything's always talking. Everything is always a fine oiled machine filled with a bunch of experimental stuff that may or may not work. But when it doesn't work, it normally actually works better because that's a good learning experience. And so I find that all these other things where you get to go outside or to lab spaces with us are also improved by our small classes and our interactive nature.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for answering that. The next common question we get are, what are some of the ways that faculty leverage the block plan to engage with their students? And Richard and Doug were going to answer this question.
Great. Well, thank you for that, James. I've had the privilege of being a speaker at the world's most prestigious artificial intelligence conference 6 times in the past decade. And in 2018, I was going to go to New Orleans, Louisiana to give some talks on my research and scheduling. And it just so happened that the last week of the January block happened to coincide with this conference in New Orleans. So I got to teach an artificial intelligence course. But instead of going through a textbook on AI, I got to end my course by having the 16 students fly to New Orleans with me. And we got to participate in the world's largest AI conference together and actually meet the researchers whose technologies are shaping this century. What the students did was they took any of the 933 papers that were published at this conference, and they took one of them based on whatever subject that was most of interest to them: robotics, computer vision, natural language processing, etc. And then they spent about a week learning the mathematics and computer science behind that research as if they wrote the paper for themselves, and then gave a presentation to their classmates before we flew to New Orleans. And it was really exciting because we could actually then meet those researchers. And that was a life-changing experience for them, also a life-changing experience for me, and would never have happened without the block plan.
Great. And Doug?
That's a great story, Richard. I remember talking to you when you got back from that class. One of the things that I find that I do a lot in terms of the block plan, and small classes help this as well, is teach through simulation. When I'm teaching classes on politics or strategy, whether it's about elections or it's about world politics or it's about armed conflict, I find that the best way to get my students into it is to put them in the shoes of the people who are in those sorts of roles. And the block means that all of my students are available to work together all of the time. So if I want to run a real-time peace game of the Syrian civil war, for example, which I did a few years ago in my peace building class, the students are available to run it all day long for 2 or 3 days. I don't have to worry about trying to line up the schedules of 20 different people taking 5 different classes each. They're all there and they're all in. And if somebody is busy, I mean, Quest students have a lot of commitments for jobs and for extracurricular activities, because we all know each other, we're able to work around that. It's not as though there's this one 45-minute window where everybody has to be there. So I do that a lot. My students pretend to be the UN Security Council, and they try to solve the challenges of the day. My peace building students tried to negotiate their way out of the civil war. Interestingly enough, everything they did in that 2 or 3 day window has happened since that time. Even the stuff that we couldn't figure out at the time and didn't seem to make any sense. So the block really enables that kind of stuff, that kind of do-it-yourself immersive learning experience. Even if you don't travel outside the classroom, you can still be all in learning by doing. I don't think that's possible anywhere else. Certainly when I've taught other institutions, I got about 5 minutes into the scheduling game trying to get everybody in the room at the same time outside of our class time, and gave up because the problem was non-trivially difficult, as Richard will attest to.
Fantastic. I think one of the really valuable parts of this experience as well is that what's something you highlighted on, Doug, is there are many shared experiences that faculty have. But then in Richard's case, there's also these unique experiences that you get to have with students by taking them to a conference or taking them on these sort of adventures and extracurriculars that the semester system doesn't allow. So thank you so much for answering that. The next question is a bit more easy, so we'll have more people answer. It's a bit of a quicker answer. It's just, what is a favorite class of yours that you have taught while at Quest? Both Emma, Doug, and Megan will answer this, and we'll start with Megan because she talked the farthest away.
So I kind of have a cop-out answer to that, which is, it's always whatever class I'm teaching at the time, I'm always like, this is my favorite class to teach. I love teaching this class, because usually you have a little bit of time to get like really psyched up and review your class before you start teaching it. And then, yeah, it's an immersive experience for the students and for the faculty who's teaching it as well. And so you kind of can't help but just be all wrapped up in whatever you're teaching. But oh gosh, honestly, it's hard to choose. I really love my foundation class that I've been teaching for the past few years is What is Life? And it's I have that class set up as a series of metabolic challenges that students have to solve, where they do some combination of, have to learn some theory, they have to learn some data collection techniques, but I don't really tell them what data to collect or how, and they have to figure all that out to solve some kind of a question. So they have to figure out if bike commuters should pay carbon tax based on the amount of carbon dioxide they're exhaling compared to how much a car emits. They have to figure out how many calories it takes to hike a section of the Pacific Crest Trail. We don't actually go to the Pacific Crest Trail. I just give them an elevation profile of and a heart rate monitor, and they learn how to do some kind of fancy converting between heart rate to oxygen consumption to calorie consumption, and they have to figure it all out, and it's really hard and really complicated, and people get really frustrated, but it's really, really fun. And that class is just a whole series of those puzzles. They go to the grocery stores in Squamish to figure out what the cheapest way in Squamish is to meet your nutritional requirements, and all kinds of things that are just sort of loosely related to metabolism, energy in, energy out kind of stuff.
That's fantastic. I took What is Life with you, and it's definitely changed since then. And I'm a little jealous that I didn't get to take this version. That sounds like
it's pretty fun.
Yeah. Next, we'll have Emma answer that question.
My favorite class that I teach is Chemistry 1, which I know is not the most creative course, but it's my favorite for a few reasons. First, I feel like it's a course that at any other university may be like boring or may not be fun or may not be like all of these things that I think that it is here. It is exciting. It is engaging. It gives students an opportunity to learn some prescriptive topics, but in the way that I've always wanted to teach it and never been able to. I also love it because I get to meet so many different students. It's the entrance point into chemistry, and if you're a student who wants to do more, you'll take more classes with me. But I also get a lot of students who are into physics or geology or physiology or math, or who just want to take chemistry and they just want to do it once. And so I get to meet everybody's students, and I get to hear all these different perspectives of how chemistry, which I maintain is the central science, and since everybody else is muted, nobody can refute that. Chemistry is the central science, and I get to meet all these really cool students with such diverse interests, and we get to just like be nerds about chemistry for 3.5 weeks and apply it to so many cool examples. And so it's intellectually a lot of basics, but the Quest students take it so far, and I get so engaged and have the best time that it's really the most fun, and it's the thing that I look forward to the most on my slate every year is the months that I get to be everybody's entrance point into the weird and wonderful world of the molecule.
Very cool. You make me want to reconsider not taking chemistry at Quest. So next up, we have Doug, who is also going to answer this question.
Megan, I think you really said it perfectly there. You know, it sort of does feel like every class, when you're teaching it, must be your favorite class. And just you saying that made me change my answer. I mean, I've had the opportunity to teach a lot of really cool classes that I would never have taught anywhere else. But the one that I think has been the most fun in the 8 years that I've been at Quest has been a class on statistics that I taught just this past January. And it was a whole lot of fun because I'm somebody who uses statistics a lot, but I didn't have a very deep formal background in statistics in my graduate training. My undergrad was in political science, and most political scientists spend time avoiding statistics whenever they can, or using only the easiest ones they can find. So when the opportunity came up to teach at Quest, I jumped on it and had this amazing experience with 20 incredibly keen students and with this huge diversity of abilities. I mean, I had some students who have worked a great deal with Richard, for example, on a number of interesting mathematical problems who were taking the course just to expand their horizons a little bit. And I had other students for whom this was the most terrifying thing they had done at Quest, but they knew they had to do it. And we had a wonderful community in that classroom where we got to really engage with these topics in a way that I had never approached them before, but that made everybody feel as though they had some skin in the game. We worked out probability by having the students roll dice, but I had loaded some of the dice, and so they had to figure out which ones were loaded and which ones weren't. We had a series of presentations at the end of the class that could be on any topic you wanted, as long as you use some of the basic tools you learned in the class. We had people who gave presentations on hockey, on the dynamics of NBA playoff games, on the density, size, and weight of lizards around the world, on elections, which of course are near and dear to my heart, and on pretty much every other topic under the sun. And one of my students said at the end of it, that was the best day of presentations I've ever had in a Quest classroom. I learned so much. And it's hard to put your finger on exactly why these things are. I think what Emma and Megan have said really cut to the core of it. Sometimes it feels like this magical group of people in a perfect condition in this wonderful room for a month. And afterwards, you can't explain what made it so wonderful, but you know that you can't wait to do it again.
Fantastic. Thank you all for answering that question. I think the next question leans in quite nicely because a big part of the Quest program and the method is also that interdisciplinary question that every single student does. So I was wondering if Richard and Emma could tell me about, and Megan could tell me about the unique possibilities that sort of come with the formation of an interdisciplinary question instead of a major. And we'll start with Richard.
Sure. Well, James, thank you. Thank you for the question. The best way I can answer that question is by telling you the story of a student that I had the privilege of journeying with a couple of years ago. Her name is Geneva Baristo. Geneva's Quest question was, how do we optimize transportation in cities? And she looked at this question from the perspective of urban infrastructure, of statistics, of computer science, of psychology, of sociology. She took a mandatory course in first year called Markets, Theory and Practice, where she learned a concept called price elasticity. And as someone who took 0 economics courses in university, had no idea what this concept was. So when Geneva and I started working together, she taught me a concept, and then I was able to help her and coach her through answering this Quest question of optimizing transportation in cities from a mathematical lens. Her graduation project was to create a new pricing formula for the city of Vancouver to help 500,000 commuters optimize their to create the best possible transit fares as TransLink, the agency, wanted to move from a highly discriminatory zone boundary system, that the system that's been in place for the last 30 years, to one based on the Asian or the European model of traveling based on travel distance. Not only was was she able to give her optimal pricing formula to the vice president of TransLink during her last month of her experiential learning block, but her pricing formula was ultimately adopted and accepted by this organization. And once this change is made, it'll help 500,000 people every single day. And so this, and by the way, that student is currently at the University of Glasgow doing a master's in a growing new 21st century field called urban analytics, smart urban analytics, which combines the very, very best of social science and math, applying to issues dear to her heart.
Fantastic, that's great. And, Emma, you also wanted to answer this question.
Yeah, so I'm going to selfishly talk about myself for a second. I'd only ever spoken to other chemists, and then I showed up at Quest, and I'm the only person with a background like I have. And so I started to collaborate with other physical scientists, and then life scientists, and then social scientists and humanities. And I started to realize how many opportunities there were for interdisciplinarity. I'm currently planning a course on forensic geology with my colleagues who teach geology, and so I'm collaborating with other physical scientists. I'm also planning a course with somebody who teaches in the humanities on historical physical science experiments. In other words, we're going to teach alchemy for 3.5 weeks. And this is something that I never thought I would do. And I'm doing it because my students have pushed me into doing this. My mentees refuse to just do chemistry. They want to broaden their horizons. When they think about pharmaceuticals, they don't just learn organic chemistry like I did. They learn economics. They take classes on health in the global south. They really push themselves to understand these really important questions from so much more than just the molecule, which is how I've always understood things. They see the molecule, but they see everything else. And because they pushed themselves to do this, I push myself to do this. And it allows us to offer these incredible courses, I think. And it allows me to walk down the hall and ask questions of my colleagues that I could never do anywhere else. And so I think there's an advantage as a student because you get to sample across so many incredible faculty members teaching incredible courses, but the students' demand for interdisciplinary courses pushes me and I think everyone else to be creative too. And so we sort of, everybody wins and everybody works together to create this community of interdisciplinarity. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to go back to anything else.
And Megan, you also want to answer this.
Yeah, I think my Quest has opened my mind also so much to the promise of interdisciplinary and even how interdisciplinary it can get. I think my concept of interdisciplinary before I came to Quest might have been a biologist working with a chemist, like me and Emma, developing a course together or writing a paper and be like, wow, those are so different. And Emma and I do help each other out with things. And it's wonderful to have her down the hall to collaborate with. But some of my colleagues at Quest have kind of coined the term radical interdisciplinarity. And I like that, and it's kind of sticking with me. And I think that that's really what we're talking about. And it's the rest of the world doesn't quite get it. I think the rest of the world is thinking about it more like the chemistry biology bridge or this sociology anthropology bridge or something where it's kind of you're already neighbors, you're already cousins. But it's been really fascinating to explore where things can go beyond that. And I have one example of a former mentee actually, where his Keystone project was kind of getting a little bit more interdisciplinary until the point where he graduated. He came at it. He was looking at how to eradicate a neglected tropical disease called trachoma that causes blindness. It's prevalent in the developing world, but has been eradicated in other parts of the world. And he was coming at it as kind of a biochemistry, microbiology approach, very much a scientist. And as we worked on his project, he kept discovering like, oh, wow, there's lots of socioeconomic and political complications here. And we sort of got it to a muddled point before he graduated. And then since he graduated, we've actually just picked it up again and are working to get his paper published. And in order to do it justice, we actually reached out to 2 other Quest alumni who were working in totally different areas. So we reached out to some social scientists to help us figure out how to do the social science part. And so we'll be submitting in the next couple of weeks a paper with 3 different Quest alumni, 2 of which I didn't even know when they were at Quest. But we're all working together on that. And this is also, this interdisciplinarity has really affected my own intellectual journey as well, I would say. I'm just planning my sabbatical for next year, and I'm planning to do research on something I could not even have imagined I would have been interested in doing or capable of doing when I started at Quest. And so I used to be really interested in how we teach science to people, but kind of like, how do we make them understand it? And how do we like get the really complicated concepts through to them? How do we really get them to understand those things? And now I'm thinking so much more about how do we teach them to think about science in ways that are inclusive and socially responsive? How do we prepare people to responsibly use scientific information and to communicate about scientific information? For me, that's mostly about the human body. How do we talk about and think about the human body in ways that are not, perpetuating harmful narratives about the body or health or gender or whatever? And it's still science that I'm really interested in, but it's sort of like what we do with that science that has become really a lot more meaningful to me.
That's fantastic. Thank you all so much for sharing about that. The next question we have is just, how do faculty at Quest help facilitate research opportunities at Quest, being a primarily undergraduate institution that doesn't have the big network that larger research institutions have? This is a common question that we get. And we'll hear from Emma and Doug on this one. And Emma, if you would like to start.
Sure. So I'll speak as a faculty member, but I'll also speak as someone who works on a committee that's job is largely to help facilitate these opportunities, and that's our Research and Scholarly Works Committee. I think there's a lot of ways that research is facilitated. I would say first and foremost in my mind is the fact that our students know their faculty. And so when I was at my sort of traditional institution, when I was a student, I actually found it to be very difficult to get research opportunities because I was one of 250. And so there's a sort of, if you're a student who has a job, or if you're a student who has certain things going on, it can be very difficult to acquire research opportunities. And here at Quest, students can come speak to their advisors, their mentors, their faculty members about what it is to do research either in or out of house. As a member of the Research and Scholarly Works Committee, I see how much research is happening with students and faculty. I myself have had 4 students working on projects with me this year, a couple on a field-based project that I'm collaborating with a colleague on, and a couple helping me develop tools for my classroom, students writing lab manuals with me, students writing programming to incorporate computational chemistry into all of my courses. But I've also had students go off-site to do research, to go work at larger research institutions, to go work in government, to go work in pharma sites off campus. And I have yet to have a student who's my mentee who says, I want to do this, and who hasn't been able to do it. Because the Quest students get to work closely with me and career services too, which are phenomenal at Quest, to get off campus and to build a good CV. And one thing you learn as a Quest student is you learn how to talk, and you learn how to carry yourself, and you learn how to be participatory in a way that's respectful. And you learn that in our classrooms, and then you get off site to do research, or you do research on site. And you're so far ahead of where so many of your colleagues are from other places. And so I think part of it is just the daily practice of being a Quest student. And then the responsibility that's imparted onto you in choosing your own major and choosing your own question gives you ownership over your research future. It makes students it makes them want to really pursue what exactly it is that they want to do. And then the institution and the faculty that are here also care about research and care about students. And I think that it creates this really good community of research and scholars. I know that I love talking to my students about chemistry. I send them papers and make them talk to me on the phone about it because I don't have any other chemists. And so, we all build our communities. And I think that that's, we could all talk forever about research. I will stop talking about research, but I too had questions about this coming to Quest. I thought, how could this be possible? And I've seen that it's, if not as possible, more possible at Quest because of the small community and the passion everyone has for what they're doing.
Fantastic. And Doug, you also wanted to talk about this.
I think Emma's said a lot of what I was going to say, so I won't recover the same ground. But I think I'd like to underscore her point about how the students at Quest define their own path. We don't tell you to choose from a preset selection of majors. We ask you what you want to know and then how you want to figure that out. And when we're teaching upper level courses, almost all of us build into the course as many opportunities as possible for the student to take the content and tools of that course and apply it to what interests them. So even if you're not in a classroom with your mentor and you're not off doing some offsite thing, I mean, those are all wonderful things that many Quest students experience. Even the day-to-day practice of being a student in your upper years at Quest is full of opportunities to take what you're learning in the classroom and apply it to what really interests you. And we all do that as tutors because we learn a ton out of it too. I mean, it's partly altruism, but we are also here because we like learning stuff, and having these students who become like research collaborators in our classrooms enriches, I think, the experience of everybody, including us.
Fantastic, thank you so much. The next question we have is asking if you can share an example of how mentorship available at Quest can create sort of the more unique opportunities for students. And both Richard and Megan will answer this question. Richard, if you'd like to start.
Sure, absolutely. Just to follow up on what Emma and Doug shared earlier, I don't think of Quest as either a research university or a teaching university. I have always felt that it was both. And I can say this from my 7 years at Quest, having published 7 different peer-reviewed papers with my undergraduates and having over 30 implemented projects where my students have solved a real-life problem for someone, and not only solved that problem, but implemented their solution to help that individual achieve some objective that they had. And so what has been a real privilege for me is journeying with the students to take whatever question they're interested in, and then me coming alongside them as their mentor to be able to take that idea and then to turn that solution into an implemented product to help an individual, and in some cases publish a paper based on that. I run a successful consulting business in scheduling optimization, and often I can involve my own students in solving these real life problems for clients. And one of my clients was one of my more recent clients was an all-girls high school in Victoria, BC, British Columbia, and a fourth-year undergraduate from Italy was able to not only construct the optimal schedule, but also have her solution implemented by the school so that hundreds of teachers and students are using this 22-year-old's schedule to figure out what classes they're going to teach, what courses they're going to take. And this student and I wrote a research paper that was accepted at the world's most prestigious scheduling optimization conference. We were supposed to go to Vienna, Austria together at the end of May. For obvious reasons, that won't be happening, but the conference has been rescheduled for the fall. And what's been really exciting and inspiring for me was to watch this student, Irene, go from a mentor-mentee relationship to a colleague-colleague relationship. And I feel that that is the real gift of working at Quest and having mentees, that because we get to know them so well, because we work on projects that are of our interest to them, because they're able to do master's level work as an undergraduate, they truly do become our colleagues. And for some of them, they even become our friends upon their graduation.
Fantastic. And Megan?
Yeah, and just to add to what Emma had said earlier about how the research opportunities are really enhanced by the fact that you know your faculty members, you have access to your faculty members. I think that the mentoring relationship is also really enhanced by the close relationships that we have, and we know, not just what classes our students are taking, but what they are thinking about doing or what they're trying to decide between for the future, what their interests are outside of academics or that are kind of complementary to their academic interests. And I think that really helps. One of my roles I see as a mentor is to help just people figure out what are the right opportunities they should pursue, whether it's an experiential learning or a summer job or a research opportunity or whatever, trying to figure out what they can do to complement the courses they're taking at Quest. So actually knowing that student really well allows me to have more things to draw from, to be like, well, have you thought about this? I know that this relates to your interest in working with the elderly, or I know that this relates to one of your personal goals of something. So it just kind of gives you more to draw from when you're trying to really just help somebody navigate their kind of path through the world. And some specific examples. Another thing I guess that we do as mentors for our mentees is kind of let them work our networks. So our colleagues at other universities, our collaborators that we do research with, people we went to grad school with once upon a time, just connecting students to the right people that are going to help them, learn the skills they want to learn or have some kind of phenomenal experience. And I do a lot of that with my students. I kind of point them in different directions, and it's worked out really well. And a couple of sort of higher kind of not higher profile, but more interesting examples. For example, I sent 3 students to work with a colleague of mine in Nepal to go into the Himalaya to do a high altitude physiology research expedition for 2 months a few years ago. I put a student in a lab at one of the hospitals in Vancouver to do some really interesting invasive research trying to figure out whether you can bike faster if you shove something up your nose to help your nostrils expand. I had a student doing, for his Keystone project, he was a wildland firefighter and was really interested in how to improve health in wildland firefighters. So he did an experiment looking at whether giving firefighters antioxidant supplements would help protect their lung function while they were out fighting fires and breathing in lots of smoke. And all kinds of cool projects that students and I wouldn't necessarily even know were possible just kind of emerge when you just kind of sit in your office and we're like, well, what do you think about this? Would you like to do something like that? How about you talk to this person that I know? And all kinds of cool things can come up.
Fantastic, thank you. One last question we kind of have that everyone can touch on if they so choose. Are there any sort of last words or pieces of advice that you would give to the students that are joining us this fall? We'll start with Megan, if you'd like to just continue right on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is keeping an open mind, as open to other perspectives and to other ways of exploring the world. I think that comes back to the interdisciplinarity thing. As a scientist, I certainly value science as a tool to explore and understand the natural world. But I sure have learned a lot when I've considered that might not be the only way that we can know and understand the world. And so, remaining skeptical and critical, but open to other perspectives, and especially not assuming that you already know how it is and that maybe you can learn from some of those other perspectives.
Fantastic. And Richard?
We're excited to have you here in September, and we look forward to having you join a community of people who love learning and will pursue a life of learning for the rest of our lives.
And Emma?
Yeah, I think Megan and Richard have touched on it. I am fundamentally changed from coming to Quest. I have a hard time articulating what Quest has done for me as a person. The community of scholars that I've gotten to be a part of on the fourth floor of the academic building is like nothing I've ever experienced. The trust that we have in each other and the bravery that my colleagues show every day by working so hard every day is just so inspiring. And the students that I get to work with every day change me and continue to change me, and always for the better. And so I would just say to show up with an open heart, ready to work and ready to become part of a life-changing community of scholars, and to also just really enjoy it. I am just finishing my fourth year at Quest. So I'm about to get my bachelor's degree. And I can tell you right now that it went really, really fast. I'm a totally different person than when I rolled up in 2016, and only for the better. I'm 24 blocks in, and it has been great. So just enjoy it.
That's to get Doug.
Quest is an absolutely transformative experience. I don't think there is any way for us to describe it. I feel very similar to Emma in the ways that it has changed me, and I've seen it change so many of my colleagues and my students. Come and join us. It will open doors that you don't even know exist yet. And it's a hell of a ride.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our faculty who joined me today on this panel. It was great having you, and it was fantastic getting you to answer some of our students' most common questions. Of course, we could answer some of them, but it's not nearly the same insight or the same stories or the same excitement behind it. So it's always great for me to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, James.